All right, we're going to get started here in just a couple minutes. My name is Greg Undo. We're going to hosting the clinic from Northern Virginia in Washington area. Let me just make sure I have the right screen set up. All right, so I think we should be seeing the Cubase screen now. So if you want to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. We should see the screen here in just a second. All right, so we see Vinny from Orlando. Good to see you again. All right, we have Norfolk, UK. Just gonna go ahead and mute some of my monitoring video. All right, so we have Sweden, Buffalo, New York, Oslo, Norway. Good to see Taylor from Pine Grove. So we have Samuel from Sweden. Says he's missed the hangouts. It's been I've had kind of an extraordinarily busy travel schedule, so we wanted to make sure we got one in July, but I've been popping around the country and the continent a bit too much in the last few weeks. All right, so let's see. We have Rotterdam. We have someone from the Justice League. That's always good to have on your side. All right, we have Paul from the UK. We have Ted from Sherman Oaks, California. I got your questions that you'd sent in, Ted. Thanks. We have Manchester, United Kingdom, Denmark. My son wants to go to Denmark, so you can go see Lego headquarters. All right, we have Sheffield, UK, Toronto, Ontario, Boston. Okay, so seeing a question on mix console. I'll copy that one over really quick. Okay, so Scotland. We have Franz from the Netherlands. We have Italy, India, Chicago. Good to see Greg from Portland. It's been a long time hangout attendee. We have San Diego, beautiful. Indonesia, Canada. All right, so we have Harlem in New York City. Someone else from Denmark. Okay, get a question, we'll copy. We have India. All right, Montreal, Chicago, Sacktown. Is that Sacramento? All right, Sweden, Riverside, California. It's not too far from our office. Melbourne, Australia. We usually don't get many Australians with the time zone change, but thank you for staying up. It's a beautiful city. I got to visit there once. We have Hungary, London, Israel. All right, if you guys have questions, please feel free to enter them in the comments field. I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but if you're watching this live, you may want to, you could do that, but if you're watching it offline, you may want to jump ahead about 10 minutes. And if you're watching it offline, you don't have to introduce yourself, but you're more than welcome to. All right, so we have Liverpool, someone else from UK, from Israel. Okay, just copying over a couple questions. And again, if you have questions, enter them in the comments field if you're watching live. All right, so we have Stockholm, Finland, Trevor from England. He's catching us live. So I see a question if I know when the next Cubase will be released with new features. I'm not sure what the exact release date of the next generation would be. Let me just go ahead. We have some people still introducing themselves. So we see what's new in Cubase 10.03. One of the big things was ARA2 support. All right, so we have people are from the Czech Republic. Okay, just copying over some questions. Thanks for questions from people. Okay, so someone else from Israel. All right. We have Russia. All right, getting some people logged in and questions copied over. Thanks for great questions. Okay, just getting some questions copied over. We'll get started here maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, we'll wait just a couple minutes. And again, thanks for all the great questions we're getting from people. Okay, so a question on Q-Link. So you see a question from Clay about saving as totally to a new project and backup isn't adequate. If you could expand on why the backup function isn't adequate, that would be helpful. All right, thanks for all the wonderful questions we're getting. Just copying over and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. So we have a question, do I plan on doing tutorials in French? I don't speak French at all. But I could pass it on to our team in Hamburg. Okay, so thanks for your clarification, Clay. I saw that come in. We have some more questions. We'll get started. All right, good to see you online, Paul. Okay, we'll just see if there's one more question and we'll not get going. Then we'll get going. Good, Paul. I'm glad that that link did a trick for you. All right, so I'm going to copy over a couple of these additional questions here. Okay, and I'm just going to Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So we had a couple questions that were sent in advance. So we can go ahead and start with those. So the first question, one of the questions we had was, can you review inspector-oriented solutions to gradually randomizing, unhumanly dead-on timing of sequencers, and likewise randomizing static dead-on pitches of flat mono synth tones included into Western tuning? I mean, using like a percentage slider on a per track basis as opposed to tempo or transpose tracks. So there's a couple different approaches that we could do for this. So I want to, let's say we have a note that starts off just one long note that'll be held here for 4 measures. And let's say I want to do like the old film composer trick where I'm going to now take that particular note. We could zoom in and grab the scissors tool. I'll hold down the Alt or Option key. And I just want to create a bunch of notes here. So now we listen to it. And I could just kind of go directly. There's a couple of areas for randomizing different events. So if you wanted to look at it a couple different ways, one would be from the inspector. So if I go to the track inspector and go to MIDI modifiers. And if you don't see MIDI modifiers active, right click, and then it may be turned off by default, but you could just open up MIDI modifiers. And from there, you could have kind of random functionality. So if we come here, we could say that we wanted to randomize the pitch. So if I come here, select this, we could say, let's randomize the pitch. And if I wanted to do a different function, I could say, let's randomize the velocity. You could do that. Or if you wanted to do the position of notes, now this will kind of do this and randomize it in real time, but I still have the one single note that's being repeated multiple times. If I wanted to now take that particular randomized element and apply it to the MIDI part, we could come directly here and just choose from the MIDI menu, freeze MIDI modifiers. Then we could just have the randomness automatically applied to the part so that it's not playing a particularly, you can have a known entity for your random components. Now we could also do some of this using, so I'm going to just turn off the randomizing from the inspector. And we could do some interesting things also using the logical editor. So in this, realize that this could be, very intimidating for some people with using the logical editor. So let's say I have all these notes, these eighth notes in my logical editor. So I'm going to go to my MIDI menu to logical editor. And what I want to do is to affect the notes. And I'm going to transform, and we can say on our filter target, and we can think of the top as what we want to do, what we want something to happen to, like the object that's going to be processed and what processing is going on directly in this particular area. So now if I wanted to come here, let's say if I wanted to set a particular key, so if we look for a MIDI note message, value 1 would be the pitch, value 2 would be the velocity, and value 3 would be release velocity. So I'm going to say I want to keep the pitch, and then we can say transpose to a scale. So let's say I want to keep it in C major. All right, so I want it to be random, but not randomly out of key. And then what I could do is go to my value 1, and then we could say set random values between, and here we could say C2, and you could also just hit the MIDI note on a MIDI controller in C4. So now when I hit apply, we could just have that. Let me just check. I'll just redo this here. So C2. Okay, so now we could just have kind of random. And if I hit it again, and now let's say if I wanted to adjust the position of notes. So we could say, again, set to random values. So we could apply now. And if I wanted to adjust the length of notes, we could say, and then we could say random and this would be the rhythm of notes. So we'll say, and I believe this is in clock pulses, I'll say between 0 and 360. And now you could just hit apply. And now we could just have kind of different rhythmic values. And if I wanted to put this to key of D major and hit apply. So you can see that kind of using, the inspector or using various logical editor functions, you can get some great choices when if you want to apply different random functions. All right, now we had another question about triggering chords. So let's say if I wanted to add, we'll just quickly add an instrument track and the ability to trigger chords from a single MIDI event. So let's say, okay, so one of the functions that you have is chord pads. And what chord pads will allow you to do is, you could actually click on your chord pads here, is it will allow you to trigger different chords from a single MIDI note. So I'm going to now just trigger and if you wanted to go and, assign the pad from MIDI input to define the chords, but if you want, you could just, if you wanted to define a chord, you could come here and say, I wanted a C minor flat 7th with an E flat in bass, so you could do different tensions and come up with really interesting chords. But now as I record just a single note, I'll go ahead and just mute this. When I record just a single note, let me just hide something really quick. So I'll just come here, record just a single note from my MIDI controller. It'll now just record everything laid out as the chords that I've defined from the chord pads themselves. So it makes it kind of a very easy way to make sure that, if you're not a great keyboard player, that you could just play one note chromatically and trigger chords, and you could have multiple octaves of chords set up as well. So I hope that makes sense, and I'm just going to check the feed very quickly. Okay, so as we got another question about zooming. So say if I switch projects here. So a lot of people are very adept at being able to zoom, where we take our cursor to the lower portion of the timeline, and we could kind of drop zoom directly there. So as we play a project, we have the ability to zoom. But what someone wanted to do is to be able to kind of zoom in a similar manner without having to change, as we click here, that will change the playhead position. So if you wanted to do this, you could hold down, I think it's Control on Windows, and just use the mouse scroll wheel, and you could zoom Okay, I think we have sound back. Thank you for sending me a quick message to let me know. That's always helpful. Um, so, all right. So if the sound goes out for people that are on social media with me, just kind of let me know. Sorry about that. Okay, so I think we were discussing about having the left and right locators snap. All right, so it looks like, I have this snap turned on here and I have it, let's say to the bar. That now as I go to adjust the snap, that it will kind of snap the left and right locators to the bar, like so. So that all seems to kind of be snapping as expected. So you could go ahead and see if that works. Let's see if I just turn snap off. That now it is freely placed. But if I turn snap on and we have it set to bar, that it won't. It's kind of doesn't seem like it's doing it now. Let me just try to reset the value here. So you can kind of see it. It will kind of snap to the bar, but it looks like it's maybe looking at quantize value, but it looks like it will kind of snap to bar there. So I can play around and see if there's any settings that might be turned off, but nothing that kind of comes to mind immediately. Okay, so we have a question on how to quantize or audio warp multiple channels at once. We can do that with drums very easily. It may not be as applicable for other sources. So let's say if I wanted to, I'll just revert this project, get rid of some of the processing. Like if we wanted to do like drum quantizing, we'll take a look at that. So if we want to make sure, we'll go ahead and we'll delete that file. We want to make sure like our drums are tight. So if I have all my drums in a folder and I turn these on with a click, you hear how some of the fills may not be as tight as we would want. Like rushed snare roll. So if we wanted to, we could double click and go directly into the hit points and I will just kind of take my hit points here. And what I want to do is find a threshold, and we want to find kind of priorities for like the kick track. We could also look at our snare. And what we want to do is just kind of make sure that we're finding kind of the rhythmically significant point. So we have this kind of bleeding through. So I don't want the hi-hat to bleed through. And let's find our hi-hat here. Okay, so we'll adjust the threshold accordingly. And now what you could do is, place all these into a group. And now you could apply, group editing on them. And when you do group editing, they're all kind of move as one single entity. And as we do this, let's go ahead to our quantize panel. And I could choose different tracks that will have different priorities. So I can say I want my snare and let's say my hi-hat to have these levels of priority. And what it's going to do is basically figure out the rhythmically significant points of the audio and kind of place markers at those. And we do this all together. So now we could create slices based on those particular elements. We could choose our quantize setting. So we could do 16th notes at this point. And let's say if we have all these, I'll just hide the lower zone here so you can see this a little better. So it's kind of cut all of the different tracks like so. And at this point, we could choose to do either audio warping or straight kind of quantizing. So I'm going to just come right over here and we'll choose to quantize, and that will move all those different parts together. And now we want to generate crossfades between all those different sections. And now as we listen to our drums, which were a bit off rhythmically, I think we had like snare roll coming up here that was off. So versus if we listen to our snare roll, if we undid all those changes, our snare roll before, if we listen with the click. So that's kind of an easy way. So again, being able to put all the tracks that you want to in a folder, enabling group editing, and going to the quantize panel. And then you could set priorities, and then you could do audio warp there. And I know it's not like a traditional multi-warp style editor, but you can do a lot of stuff there quite easily. Okay, so we had a question from Israel. How come there are only 4 cues available in Cubase 10 Pro? And this is talking about the cue mixes. So when we go into our mix console, we could have different components here. So it's So we have 4 individual cue mixes. Like if we wanted to set up a headphone mix for drummer, bassist, guitarist, vocalist. And there's also, you could use the control room as a 5th cue mix. So I've asked to increase cue mixes like up to 8 in the past. I'll reiterate the request since we have a question on it, but that's 4 independent headphone mixes, and that covers a lot of different scenarios. I know if you have like a whole band, they could obviously want more, but you could do 4 cue mixes and also have 4, 8 aux sends if you need to as well. But I'll reiterate the request for additional cue mix. Okay, so it's a question. Sometimes I want to import mono wave tracks into Cubase, and then the balance is missing. How come? Make sure sometimes as people add a mono track, so if I come here, let's add an audio track. We could add a mono track, and sometimes people, will send it to a mono output. So if I add a track and send it to a mono out here, often when you go into the channel, you won't necessarily have like the panning options. So, but if I add a mono track that's routed to the stereo output, which we'll see here, then you have the panning options. So probably if you don't have a panning control for your mono track, what you want to do is to make sure that it's going to a stereo track, because if it's just going to a mono out, there's no panning capability, which kind of makes sense. So make sure that you do have a, your mono track, going to a stereo output. So we have a question: is there a way to export the names of cycle markers when exporting cycle markers? Okay, so let's come over here. Let's say if I created a marker track here, I'll just grab my range selection tool and let's just add some cycle markers. Okay, so just click here. Oh, sorry, I'll undo that. And let's say I want this as cycle marker. Yep, sorry. We'll add a cycle marker here. Add a cycle marker here. And we'll add another cycle marker. So as we kind of come here, sorry about that. I just set my range here. Okay, and let's say I've named these cycle markers accordingly. All right, and as we do this, we can now just okay, so we have our beautifully named cycle markers. Now when we go to export audio mixdown, we can export based on the cycle markers, and then we'll have, I think you should see a naming scheme. So we could set up a naming scheme, and what you want to do is to have the name of the cycle marker directly in here. So you can see you have the name, the channel name. You could say the cycle marker ID, the name of the file, channel name, date, whatever. You could have those. So set up the naming scheme. And that way, when you export the audio file, you could have the name of the cycle marker embedded as part of the export audio mixdown. So again, you'll see under file name options, you just come here and you can set up your naming scheme accordingly. And that will embed the name of the cycle marker into the name of the WAV file. So a question, will there be another promotion soon? I missed the last one, probably for the 50% off. I'm not sure if we'll have a promotion like that. It was incredibly successful for us, but it was a very special occasion with the 30th anniversary. So I'm not sure if we'll see a promotion like that coming. And we did, run it for a while, and we extended it to our existing Cubase users for updates and upgrades as well. So I'm not sure if we'll see that style, that level of promotion coming again on Cubase, but there are different discounts throughout the year. Okay, so question: how can I sidechain a high-low shelf in a drum kick or snare? So if you wanted to, really, all you have to do is, let's say if you have a sidechain set up. So say I want the kick to sidechain, and I'll just revert this really quickly. So if I wanted to sidechain the bass from the kick here, so I can go to my bass track. And I'll just get to like an insert here. And at this point, we'll just get to and I'm going to activate the sidechain. Let's try a different compressor here really quick. Okay, so I'll just throw this compressor on. So I'm going to sidechain, and we'll do it from the kick. So as we now do the sidechain. And really what you can do is just kind of, you know, if you wanted to just kind of chain that and add an EQ. So say you just want to go to the studio EQ. So you might want to put the studio EQ before the sidechain. That I think that would probably, you know, so depending on some of the EQs will also have sidechaining capability. I'm trying to think of which. I think one of the EQs will also allow you to sidechain. So, but you could, you know, often send that to a particular group, I think, if you wanted to, and then just, you know, do sidechaining to the group. But I think one of the EQ plugins will have sidechain input that you could experiment with. Okay, so let's go through some more questions. Thanks for everyone's questions. Okay, so another question on can you explain a mono track that shows a left and right in input versus a mono track that only shows left or right input, left and right input. I think this is kind of what we discussed before, and it could be depending on the output. Okay, so we have a question. What does the meter at the top do when you invert what is normally making a loop? I think it turns red, but don't know what that does. I'm just trying to... So maybe this question on the metering, is it just that like when you go to record a particular track that you see it turn red? Like if I come here and record, that turns red. But I'm not sure if that's what the metering question is. So maybe if you could reiterate the question. So you could, you know, you could try to, you know, reiterate that. So, okay, so we have a question from Nick about quantizing an audio event, not the hit points, but the actual audio regions. So, you know, if you have particular events, you know, we talked about how you could do it with the hit points here. You know, you could slice, you know, you could create slices for each of the regions here. So where you have, which will turn it kind of into a part that will, you know, and then at this point, you know, once you've done the slices, you could quantize just by hitting the letter Q or other quantize values, but it's going to be kind of based on the slices. So, but you could, you know, turn the hit points. You know, so once you're in a particular part, you could turn the hit points and then create slices and quantize quite easily for that. So I think that's what you may mean by the, when you say actual audio regions. I think that'll do the trick. If not, just let me know, Nick. Okay, so what are the best levels to record distorted guitars, and what are the best levels to record vocals in Cubase? There's a lot of different schools of thought on this. I know a lot of people try to aim for minus 12 or minus 6 dB for recording. And I know a lot of people, like when they're kind of transitioning from an analog mixing paradigm to digital, that they just would give themselves an extra 6 dB of headroom, and found that works. Instead of going for 0, they would go for 6 or minus 6. And if they're going for minus 6 before, they would go for minus 12. So those are kind of good safe levels, but there's no real set in stone amount for that. So you could kind of experiment, and if you're doing how much gain you're getting into your audio interface, if you're overloading the interface, that could matter as well. So if you're kind of overloading the interface before it even gets into Cubase with the loud guitar, that could impact your levels as well. Okay, so I know we had a question on the save to new project. I'll come back to that because we had some other points with that. So we have a question: what is the post fader portion of the inserts used for? So when we have our inserts here, and if we open up our channel fader, we could have processes that will occur before the signal hits the fader. So this way I could apply the compressor, and it's going to affect the gain structure before the fader, before the signal goes to the fader. A post fader would be sending that signal after the signal flow of the fader, so it's not as contingent upon the fader, so that way it's not affecting the gain structure on the input going to the fader. It'll just process after. So different functions, like a lot of times you may want to do like dithering and some final limiting post fader, and a lot of compressors and stuff like that pre fader. And if you have the channel strip here, it's a question I get quite a bit, is how do I switch like the position of the elements within the channel strip? You could just drag and drop like so, but if you wanted these to come before the signal flow of the inserts, you could just kind of click here and see the signal flow change, so that you could have the channel strip come first before the inserts, or that. And you could move your line here. So experiment with, as you drop plugins in, knowing that these plugins will add gain before this fader, and these plugins will process after that level. So it really depends on what you're trying to do for the gain structure, where you want to have the actual inserts placed, whether it's pre or post fader. Okay, so we have a question: how can I time stretch or change the tuning of audio? So let's say if I wanted to come here, let's say I'll go to this bass part, or I'll just jump to another song. Okay, so if I wanted to take like a vocal, there's a number of ways. If I wanted to, I turn it up, you wouldn't mind. So if I wanted to just, time compress a portion, you could come over here, and there's several different modes for the object selection tool. And one could be like, if let's say we have a drum loop here, this would be probably a little more practical. So we go to our drum loops. Okay, so if I have a drum loop, and I wanted that to stretch or be longer or shorter, you could go to the object selection tool. One is sizing applies time stretch. So if I want to take that loop and fit into that amount of time, we can now just kind of play the particular loop. And let's just see if I had something soloed wrong. All right. So again, you can now just kind of come over there and stretch the timing of the audio. Let me just... All right, I'll just do it in our loop here. Okay, so we play this loop. I think I just had a fade out probably on that particular track. So let me just go to the fader here. Sorry about that. Okay, so now just take the automation off here. I had to fade out in the song. So if I have a particular drum loop that we drag in, and if I play this loop, we can listen to it. But now if I wanted to time stretch the loop, there's a number of different ways. One is just to use sizing applies time stretch. So I could just grab kind of the edge of it, and that's going to play that loop faster to fit into that amount of time. And if I wanted to change the pitch, we could also just come here and choose to transpose directly from the info line. So even if you wanted to take like the lead vocal here and you could just change the pitch. Now you could also select, different audio bits and go into the offline processing. So if you want to take a loop here and say, okay, we have this particular loop we listen to. So if I hit F7, this could open up our direct offline processing. And I could choose to do time stretching here. Excuse me. So in here, we could also just say I want it to be, this long in seconds, samples, or BPM. You could also do pitch shifting directly here. So if you wanted to, say I wanted to go down an octave, you could just kind of put in different pitch shifting points here and be able to pitch shift audio and have that process. And now when you listen to it, but you could just simply do pitch shifting, either from the direct offline processing. That's also available if you just select the audio file and go to processes, or directly from your info line here, where you could have the pitch shifting effect and change that in real time. So this would process it offline, and the info line would just do it in real time. Okay, so we had a question on Q-Link and what that does. This will be in the mix console, so I'll just jump back to my other project. We'll activate this. So we got multiple projects open simultaneously. Okay, so what a Q link or quick link allows you to do is a number of different things. So if I wanted to take a number of tracks, for instance, in my mix console, and I wanted to quickly bring down all the drums, I could activate Q link here, and you can do this by Alt or Option Shift to do that temporarily. So as soon as I activate Q link, I can now just group all those different components together like that, and then turn Q link off and move them all independently. So this will take all selected channels and be able to do that. Now we could also do some other clever things. So let's say I have Q link turned on and I want to go to an insert, and I want to apply that insert to all these different channels. So let's say I just wanted to put a DJ EQ across all the channels. That way I could add that particular process and have it stacked across multiple channels at once. We could also do quick link for routing. So if I wanted to assign, if I come here and I have a group track, so we'll make it a stereo group track. And let's say I wanted to put it after all of my drums, and let's just go to like our full routing here, and I wanted to assign all my drums to that particular bus. At this point I could hold down, I could turn on the Q link, and with all the channels selected I could say go all to the same destination of group 1. So those are some of the things that you could do with quick link, but again, it's, you know, sometimes we could set up links with multiple parameters, like, you know, where, you know, if you go to a link group, you know, you can say I want the volume to be linked but not panning, and I want sends to be linked but not inserts or dynamics, whatever. Whereas quick link is meant for, I just want to grab these really quickly, link them together, and then not have it permanently defined. But when I run into a situation where I may need to actually, you know, just quickly link something where I'm not committed, I just need it for that one time. That's kind of the intention of the quick link feature. So, and then again, you have the permanent link, and this would allow you to, you know, link all of your different parameters here. So, and you could pick and choose, and you could, that would be a more permanent link group. And you could label those. So you could say, here I wanted to go to my drums. So now when I just simply come here, I could just say, okay, let's go to my, I called it my rums accidentally. So I could go to my drums and I could just link my channels. And if I hold down the option key, I could temporarily suspend the link just on that one particular one. Now, as you do linking, if you have send effects, you may drop the level of the volume, and that drops the level going into your sends here. So, which could be tricky. So a lot of times what you want to do, if you have like all your drums going to different link groups and you have like them going to sends, you know, and you could link these as a VCA group. So now that you have those set up as a VCA, just scroll over. So now you could kind of just have your kit set up as a VCA folder. So, you know, even if you wanted to come here, you can say let's add a VCA fader to those particular tracks. And the VCA fader, as you adjust the volume, won't affect like the volume going into the send. So you could take your drums as a group and be able to drop the volume without affecting the actual amount of the signal going directly into the VC, going into like your reverb sends. So that's kind of the difference between the different link groups. Okay, we'll go on some different questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. Okay, so we had a question about like importing a song. So my question is on importing a song and wanting to slow it down, but no option to change resample sample rate when loading it up. So how would you slow down a track once imported in? So let's say if I have, and we can do this, I'll just do it with a drum loop, but it'll work with a stereo mix. And I think all my projects will have copyright stuff on it. So there's a couple, or let me see, I may have one. Let me just take a quick look, see if I can find this. Look one other place really quickly. Okay, here we go. All right, so there's a number of ways to kind of change the tempo of a track that's been imported. So okay, so let's say I have just a track here. So one of the things you could do is if you know what the tempo of the session is. So let's say if I have a drum loop here. So a lot of times you may have a particular drum loop, and sometimes you would see it in the name of the file, kind of what the tempo is. And there's ways of figuring out kind of what the tempo is. One, you could just kind of count the particular beats here. So we could say that's, if you don't know what the tempo is, you could go to your project menu. And a lot of times it will have the metadata, like especially with drum loops. But if you wanted to, you could say, I wanted to take this. And let me just. And go to the beat calculator, and you could type in how many beats it is, and it will tell you. You could also do a tap tempo and tap with your space bar and get the tempo like that. But if you have something that has, and then as soon as you kind of know what the tempo is of the loop, you could place it into musical mode. And once it's in musical mode, it will now that loop will just kind of follow whatever tempo you have. So I'll just put this into a quick loop, and I'll drop my tempo. And that loop will speed up and slow down to match the tempo. So once it's in musical mode. So once I take it out of musical mode, that particular file won't play in time. Now, if you have like an existing track that has varying tempos, let's say something like this, you could select it and go to the project menu to tempo detection and do an analysis of it. And now when you listen to it, and I'll turn on my click track, we can see that it's going to be almost a different beat, different tempo for every beat, which is pretty typical. So there's slightly different tempo changes. So if I wanted to select this file, I can now, oh, sorry, didn't like that. What you're able to do, I hit the wrong button there. Just import that file. So let's say even on the multi-track here, and let me just exit out of this version, it's older Cubase, opened by accident. So once you have an audio file in there, I'll just search for it over here really quickly. Okay, so now just kind of take this, and so say we have this going on. So at this point, you could do a tempo detection of the project. And at this point, what you could do is take the different metadata for the audio files. If you go to audio, to advanced, and then I could say set definition from tempo. And that's going to embed all the tempo changes as metadata within the audio file. So even though this is changing in tempo, just check my connections real quick. I could just change the tempo to be perfectly steady, slow it down, and now each beat of the audio track is going to speed up and slow down accordingly. Or if I want to take just a particular portion of the tempo, I could come here and just drag that up. So when it comes here, it's going to start to speed up. Or if you want to do like a retard, so as you kind of get so your audio can be freely played back at whatever tempo you'd want to do. Okay. So question, is it possible to run the Yamaha Studio Manager with Artist or Pro? I believe that it runs with the Pro version. It may run with the Artist. I haven't run it in a while. I unfortunately don't have any Yamaha hardware that Studio Manager works with, but I believe it still works. But I believe so. I haven't tried it in a while. Okay, so next question. How do I have some effects on one portion of a track and different effects on another portion of a track? Do I have to record two separate tracks? You know, what some people will do is, you know, come here and you could have sends. So let's say if I wanted to have two different reverbs, for instance, there's a couple ways of applying this. So I'm going to right click and let's add a send effect and say, okay, I want let's say Roomworks reverb, and let's add a convolution reverb. Okay, so one method would be to just, you know, as you're doing this, is to, you know, if you want more of the Roomworks, you could automate this. So with this, all you have to do really is click on the R and W. And now when I go back and rewind, you'll see the automation come in as I let go of the mouse. So you don't have to split it up to two tracks. You could automate it, but you could also do some offline processing. So if I wanted to take, we'll bypass these here. I could select just this range and hit F7 and say, okay, I just wanted to add a plugin, and we'll find our reverb. So let's say I want my reverence plug in there. And now that's processed that particular section of the audio file. And let's say here I wanted a delay on this one for some reason. All right, so I'll just turn on a mono delay. So now when we listen to this, it'll just be, and when I jump here, that will have the reverence on it. Now, the cool thing about this is you could come over here and just say, I wanted to add more and change the effect. So, and that will just reprocess. So if I'm here with my delay, I can say I wanted this to be a 16th note delay. And that's actually processing the particular audio file in real time. Now, if you wanted to, like 10 years later, you could actually just right click and you could modify the changes even after saving, or you could delete the changes so that you could go directly back to square one and have no processing. So you kind of have destructive processing that can be done in a non-linear fashion as well. So I hope that makes sense of how to put effects on different sides. So question, can you have multiple projects open at the same time? Yes, so you may have seen me have multiple projects. So if I wanted to come here and just drag and drop, so you have one active session at a time. So I could have a project here and say, okay, I really want, you know, to drag and drop an audio file from this project in directly into that one. We could have it automatically copy into the folder if you want, but that's all you have to do. So you could drag and drop multiple sessions, but one is active at a time, and you could activate it by kind of clicking on this little icon in the upper left-hand corner, so that would activate that particular project. Okay, so I had a question. Says, do pretty lush, synthy, funky stuff. What are your go-to kind of rules for creating clear and loud beat? As it always, down to technique, or their drum packs you're on. You know, one of the plugins that's really, you know, so incredibly good for drums that's often overlooked is, let's say if I just come here, we'll go back to like that little rock project we had. So we'll jump here. And there's one plugin, and you could use this for, you know, I often refer to it as kind of the anti-suck plugin for drums, and it's called Envelope Shaper. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of my drums here, and I want to assign all of my drums to a particular group here. So I will just right click, just go into my mix console here, and then I'm going to right click and just add a group track to the selected channels. Okay, so now all of my drums are going through this bus. So just on this particular bus, on the drums, I'm going to open up the envelope shaper, which is under dynamics. So if I want more attack, if I want to have more body or more release, and you can do stuff like I want it to be super tight with a lot of attack. So just bypassing that. So a lot of people call it like a transient designer. So if your drums are ringing too much or you want more body out of them, that's a great plugin for, you know, acoustic drums and electronic stuff. I see some people even kind of throw it on a master bus, and you know, so it's a great method for doing that. Okay, so we had a question, and we had gotten some additional information about saving to a project, and they found that the backup project wasn't good enough. Okay, so it says, I often have an inspiration for a new idea while working in an existing project. I want to save as my new project. Backup asks if you want to keep the backup when I open the original file, leading to deleted project. So what I would do if you are in the middle of a project and you have like a moment of inspiration on a particular project. So let's say, okay, I was just messing around and we came up with a cool guitar lick. But I just happened to record this in a different project. So let's say, that's my cool guitar lick and it's not related to this song whatsoever. One method you may want to investigate is just to do a new empty project and kind of using multiple projects here. Let's say, and just say, wow, I really liked that particular idea. Let me just reposition some of the windows here. So we can say, this idea was really awesome that we did in this particular project. So I could say, let's just take, these files here and, drag and drop, whether it's MIDI or audio, directly into another project. And then you could erase them from the other project. So you could have the audio files and MIDI information automatically carry over. You could also just come here and let's say, okay, this is our active project. If you could just come over here and just say, okay, I want to import tracks from project. So let's say I want to come directly here. Let's get to another project. So you could select a project here and say, okay, I want to import those tracks directly into this project. And then you could erase them from the other. So that's an easy way of doing it. A different approach that I think may work sense if you kind of have unrelated musical ideas and just kind of drag and drop or import directly in, and then you could erase them from the unused projects. If that doesn't make sense, let me know. Then you could just simply do the save as function. Okay, we had a question for those of us going away on holiday. What tips do you have to create music on only a laptop using chord pads, maybe? So the chord pads are really helpful. You could also come up with, some really original ideas. If you hit like Alt or Option K, you could have kind of the built-in QWERTY keyboard that you could trigger from your mouse, or if you could hit the computer keys to play different things if you don't want to take a small controller with you. So those are two ways I would do. I travel constantly for work, so to be able to on a plane pull it up and have an idea, and you could kind of learn how to play the little MIDI keyboard pretty well. So those are some suggestions that would tend to work for a getaway setup on a laptop. Okay, so I'll go through some more questions. Thanks for all the great questions. So a comment, please allow to expand all inserts in the channel strip as same when bringing up individual in inserts. Okay, so let's just take a look, making sure I understand this. So it says, please allow to expand all inserts in the channel strip as same when bringing up individual as inserts. So maybe this is wanting to have multiple inserts visible. So let's say if I come here and I have multiple inserts going on. There's a quick keyboard shortcut. So let's say I have all this, and I think the question might be how to see all of the inserts or open up all the inserts accordingly. So I think if you come here to the inserts, try to remember what there's a key command I always forget. Just bypass this. I'm sure I forget this one key command all the time. Try to remember what the key, but there is a keyboard shortcut to open up all. Okay, so if you hold down, so I'm not sure if this is the question, you could let me know, but if you want to see all the inserts on your track, if you hold down, click on the edit channel button while holding down Alt Shift, that'll bring up all your inserts for you. So if that's not what you intended to ask or wanted, just let me know in the comments, and hopefully we'll be able to get to it in time. Okay, so question, because of latency latency I've been having to mix down music, then set up new projects to do vocals of same song running lower buffers, but when I bring things back to project, it's always a mess. So, if you have mixed down parts, what you may want to try, just out of curiosity, is just to right click and you could disable tracks, so once they're mixed down this way, it won't take it won't take additional CPU if you've done mix downs. And then you could right click on the tracks to enable them and it won't take processing. So that may be something to try. So that I know a lot of people will do that, to get around it with, older CPUs and dealing with the capability of, working with larger projects and needing the lower buffer size. So, all right, we'll move on to some of our comments. So question, would be nice to have a blank space in channel strip for something. Is there a reason you'd want a blank space, or do you need more functionality? So if you could maybe indicate that. Hi, Greg. Quick question with ARA or the ARA and Melodyne. If the project is shared with the user who doesn't have Melodyne, ARA, do the Melodyne edits carry across, get rendered to the audio? I haven't experimented with. I've just got my license of Melodyne to play around with, and I haven't had a chance to install it. But I think, if it's not carried over, one of the things that you could do is, once you have like your audio, if you go to process, you could try to like within the sample editor, you could also try to flatten the audio file there, and that may just render the ARA functionality. I'm not positive if it would be carried over and how that would work. Okay, so we see a question on how to use the old method for pitch shifting. So with in pitch shifting, time stretching, I think we covered that a little earlier. So let me just jump back in time. Okay, so I see a question on, can the session backups be stored in the same, can there be a subdirectory for the backup sessions? People are finding it cluttered, so I pass that on to the product planners last time I was in Hamburg, so hopefully we could see that. It seems like kind of an easy thing. All right. Let me just jump back. Okay, just reading through some comments. Okay. Okay, so I see a question. How can I integrate CC functionality and PreSonus fader port 8 to use faders for expression? A lot of the different fader units don't actually transmit MIDI CC, so it's really, you probably need to just set it up within the fader port 8 so that it transmits MIDI CC. So a lot of it's kind of doing other protocols for sending stuff out. So it's really kind of whatever the fader port, if that's actually spitting out MIDI CCs, which a lot of them don't, interestingly enough. So okay, I'm just getting kind of back in line here. Give me just a second. I'm going through some of the comments. Okay, still reading through comments, just catching up. Okay, so we had a comment that someone wanted to slice in sampler. It's really easy just to kind of do that. A lot of people don't know that you could do that functionality right inside of Groove Agent. So say if I do this, I open up a Groove Agent SE. can now drag any sample directly onto a pad and go to slice here and create slices. And now you could also just create a MIDI pattern that can be dragged directly onto the project window as well. So if you want to look at your MIDI data, you could just see all the different slices. So you probably don't need the sampler to slice, since it's already handled directly inside a Groove Agent SE. Okay, so I'm just seeing a comment that their export audio mixdown box doesn't show any check boxes. So it really could depend upon, so we say when you do export audio mixdown, if you have export channels selected, you don't get a lot of the different options. And in the Cubase Pro version, you could have this. And if you have cycle markers, you'd see cycle markers kind of pop up directly over here as well. So depending on the version that you have, but also make sure that you have export multiple channels activated. So I just had a quick question. I think it was from someone who had migrated from Sonar about turning something into MIDI. So if we wanted to, there's a couple different ways of doing it. Let's just go to a particular project here. We can show you. And they said, with using ARA, so if we wanted to select our file here, we'll look at it and we'll go to our Very Audio. You do a quick analysis of it, and then we could choose to, within Very Audio, under functions, you could just say, and this will work for monophonic audio, or you could just say extract MIDI information. So we could retain the dynamic velocity, hit OK. And now you could have a MIDI track from extracted directly from your audio. So it's a pretty straightforward way. It may not be the same workflow of what you've seen in other tools. So. Okay, so we had a question about making two different tempos, like two different songs that have different tempos match. So let's say, if I wanted to, let's take that, let's see if we saw the jazz track open. Okay, so like if you want to do something like kind of remix or taking two different recordings with different tempos. So let's say you take our jazz piece here and just go to your tempo detection. All right, and what I want to do now is kind of find the downbeat. All right, so it's probably going to be right here. So we'll go to our key signature. Sorry, just hit the same thing again. All right, sorry about that. It's the wrong function. Did it twice. Okay, let's find this. Okay, so once we select this, we'll do our tempo detection really quickly. All right, and I'll just adjust my audio connections real quickly so I don't kill everyone volume-wise. Okay. So now that we have this, and I'm going to just grab my pencil tool and on the signature track there. All right, just catch the beginning. Okay, so now, and if I want to just have a drum loop that's totally random with different tempos, just find one some audio. And then really all you have to do is take, any of the different loops, and then as soon as you select it, place it into musical mode, and that will automatically time stretch. And we'll make sure that we start on the grid here. And then you could have those two different loops line up. Let's see if I can find a worse loop. All right. So now, once we place that into musical mode, your different drum loops will now, once they're in musical mode, automatically speed up and slow down to match. All right, now we had a question about how to show, if I could show how to do side chaining on bass and kick. So I'll just open up our project here quickly. Okay, so let's say we have a project that's like this. So what I'm going to do is, here's my kick track on top. And then I'll have my bass below. So I'm going to go to this track. We'll go to our inserts. And we have our compressor turned on. And I activate sidechaining here. Just to the right of that, we could select which track feeds that sidechain. So I'll say the kick. And now as we play, and that's how you could sidechain. So once again, the track that you want to do the sidechaining on, you want to have your dynamics come directly here, activate the sidechain, and just to the right of that, you could set your sidechain, your key input from there. And then it's kind of simplified from previous versions. Okay, so we have a question about how to remove a vocal from a song. You know, there's no real method for doing that. You know, there's some early technology. I think a company called ProSonic had some interesting technology they called Pandora's Box, and it's probably in the late 90s. That worked amazingly well with some things, and you know, it really, some tools will just you know, try to remove the center channel, but there's obviously a lot of things like kick and snare also in the center channel. So it could be very hard to remove just a vocal. So nothing that works reliably, especially vocals that are panned or vocals that often have effects. So that could be very tricky. So there's no real tool that I think anyone could recommend to really get rid of vocals. Okay, so just reading a question on EQ. Okay, so a question about linear scale, like someone had recorded guitar and there's some high noise in a particular EQ frequency, like around 19K. Yeah, around 19K. So let's go ahead and take a look at how to use a channel EQ to kind of, you know, get rid of that. So when we come over here to our inspector track, we'll now. So, you know, you do have high shelves and shelving EQs here. So if you wanted to come over here, you know, you could adjust kind of, you know, your shelf right here, and you could set the frequency. You know, so if you have kind of a noise, you can kind of get rid of it just like that. And one of the things that you could often do is like if you're kind of using the parametric EQ, so let's say if we'll just kind of turn that off, and I come here, you know, if you really want to find the particular frequency that's like really annoying in a particular range, you know, you could come over here and you could switch, you know, you could do like different shelf EQs. So at this point, you could do that. So you could kind of find the annoying frequency, and then if you right click, you could just invert. So you could kind of accentuate the EQ frequency. So often when you're looking for problematic frequencies, what you want to do is to, you know, an easy way to find it is to accentuate it, and then just to right click on the EQ band and invert it. But you could probably do that, or again, work with, you know, your shelves here, and you could set, you know, so you could just find a particular frequency range kind of right there. So probably your shelves should be able to take care of it if it's just something at like near 20K to get rid of. So I would try those two things. See a question for a Nuendo exclusive hangout. So yeah, we could schedule one. I've kind of been doing a lot of Nuendo seminars recently. But yeah, we could definitely get one scheduled. And I'm seeing a question on, is it possible to see ghost notes like in FL Studio? So I'm not sure what a ghost note is. I mean, I know what it is kind of in a musical context, but maybe if you could explain what a ghost note is in FL Studio, that'd be helpful. All right, going through some more questions. Thanks everyone for great questions. I hope everyone's learning a couple tips and tricks. All right, so seeing questions, you know, can we extract vocals from 2-track mix? Again, nothing works really reliably for that. So, you know, I don't think you're going to find a magic tool to do that other than someone having the multi-tracks and not including the other vocals. And seeing some more discussion on ghost notes. So if someone could explain what a ghost note is, we could take a look at it and see if it could be done in Cubase. It could be just a term. Um, so, seeing a question: is it possible to bring back? Is it, let's see? Is it possible to bring back an audio temp change back to original settings without using Control plus Z? So if you, it depends on, you know, if you could specify whether it's an edit or something in the mix console or processing, you know, there may be some ways, but if you could specify that, that would be really helpful. Okay, so we had a Groove Agent question about, we'll just open up a new project about starting it outside of not starting it but remaining in sync. Okay, so question was, all right, so we're going to drag a sample in here. So all right, so it's kind of a long sample. All right, and we could choose kind of different start positions for the sample. So if I want, I'm just going to reread the question here, make sure I'm understanding it correctly. I think so. To ask if you start from any, if you change the start position, and then will it remain in sync? I think if you wanted to remain in sync, you may. I'm trying to think of. I mean, it would probably want to be kind of the same position. You could adjust the MIDI trigger note to do that. What you could do is if you do slice, so if you slice, and this may work for you, let's say you create the slices, and then from the pad here, you would then see kind of the MIDI part. And then you could pick which parts, you know, you could just play the MIDI notes. Let me just drop that up here. So now when we play back, you know, you could choose which parts, or you could slide within the MIDI notes to trigger the loop. So I think you could do it like that. But, you know, so play around with slicing, and that will create a pattern pad. And then you can manipulate the pattern pad to be in sync, or if you wanted to, you know, slip the notes around or do variations on the notes, you could do that quite easily. So see if that could work for you. And if not, you know, just let me know. Okay, so we'll see if the audio is kind of back. So we had a question, can you customize Cubase shortcuts? So if I want to go to the edit menu, you can go to key commands and at this point, every keyboard shortcut can be customized to whatever functionality you want with the ability of making macros. Okay, so I think we have a question. Is it possible to sync configurations between the mix console and the track? So let's come over here. Okay, so we're gonna just come here. Let's add configuration. We'll call it configuration 1. And let's say in configuration, I want to hide these tracks. So I'll go to my visibility settings here. And we see only these tracks, and let's add a new configuration. Okay, so we can jump back and forth between our different configurations. Okay. And let's see if this is now synced with the mix console. So it looks like the configurations are going to be independent for the mix console, whereas you could, but the channel view is synced. So if you're here, turning this on, but it will be kind of independent configurations. And the other part of the question was when you add a new track, so let's say if I come here, I add an instrument track. Let's just do a loop mash. That this now kind of shows up in all of the configurations. So I passed that on to developers when I was there in Hamburg last month. So, or to the planning team. So they're aware of that, and hopefully we'll see something. But I mentioned that already. But okay, so just seeing, reading question. Is there a hotkey to assign like a track, like full left and right? And I think this is maybe putting the left and right locators around an event without having to drag. So if you have, let's say, some events that look like this, and you want the locators to go around that event, hit the letter P, like Paul, and that will put the left and right locators around the selected event. So select that, P, and you'll see the left and right locators automatically reflect. So the letter P, and that's sort of for parts to locator or something like that. Okay, so I had a question about how to save project colors for recall. So if you just go to your project color setup, you can, kind of come right over here, and you could have options where you could save, as you come over here to different presets, you have options where you could make this the default colors for you. So at that point, just kind of save that, and that will open up. So again, go to um, your project menu, and then you can go to project color setup. So once you have all the colors set up, and you could change each of the colors accordingly, you could append and add new additional colors, and then save them as presets directly there. Question, is there a way to have the chord track affect polyphonic audio track? Not currently. It might be something that we'll see in the future, but currently the functionality isn't in Cubase. You could do it for monophonic audio part, but we just incorporated the ARA2 interfacing, so hopefully, we'll see steps moving forward with some additional functionality, perhaps with third-party tools. So question, how can you open a new channel in the mixer? So basically the mixer will automatically kind of correlate to what you have here. And let me see if we could add tracks here. So if you just come right here, you could say you want to add a folder track, add a VCA, add a group track. So there are, if you're directly here and have the mix console, you can, as you add tracks here, you could click on the little plus sign. Those will automatically be reflected in the mixer just like that. So you can do it mostly from the track view is kind of how it's designed. Okay, so I'm reading the comment on MP3 tags. So when we go to the export audio mixdown, so if you could tell me what is different in the earlier versions, that would be helpful. I know a lot of people miss kind of the attributes over here for that, and for different naming schemes as well. But if you could let me know, and if there's parts missing, I could pass that on. Okay, so a question, how can you have multiple volume automations on different track? Um, so I think, let's say if I come here and I do a quick automation. What I know some people do is, just to duplicate the track, and then you could copy the automation, because I think if we did a new track version, that the automation still stays, and that's kind of tied to the mix console. So it's not really. So what some people also do in this case, and this is pre-fader, I realize, but a lot of people will just kind of draw in with the pencil tool. So if you grab the pencil tool on a particular part, let me just do it with a particular audio information. So some people will, just grab the pencil tool and draw in automation there. But the automation is not necessarily tied to the event. It's kind of tied to the timeline with the actual, mix console. So, some people will just duplicate tracks and write different automation and copy and paste to different tracks if you need to. But the intention is it's not while you can't have it linked to the event, it's a mix console function and not a function of the event itself. So that's why we kind of see it behave that way. Okay, just reading through some comments. I kind of skipped ahead. Okay, so just seeing question, why is there no render? Still no render aux option like commit in Pro Tools. So, if you, again, just kind of come over here and choose to, render in place. You could choose to, once you go to your render in place here, I'm not sure, I don't know that function in Pro Tools, but here you could just choose to, if you wanted to render with effects, if you could also render to a group and have that group as an input. So you could export that group, into your project. So maybe, I don't know the particular function. I don't know Pro Tools. So if you could say what you want to accomplish, I might be able to show you a couple things. But there's a lot of flexibility in render in place. So the question is, I have a Modi X and can you use the foot switch to control like punch in, punch out, start, stop. So if you come over here, there may be, you could set up a generic remote. And within the generic remote, you could have it for, different transport functions. So you can say, I want this particular MIDI input to control transport and start and stop. So you could set it up, kind of click on the plus sign here, add a generic remote, and at that point you could, just, add a generic remote, and then you could program any MIDI message to do functions, including from your Modi X. Just reading through some questions. All right, so question, how do I set up so every channel is at minus 12 dB? So again, this is where you can do the quick link. So you could also do kind of absolute. And let's say if I wanted to, you know, come here and let's just do the quick link. And you could just move all of them together so that they're at, you know, whatever value you want. So you could just put on absolute and quick link and move one of the faders to minus 12 and they'll all be at that particular level. And you could start off your mix just like that. Any way to use Cubase and Cubase 10 32-bit plugins, you know, it's really not advised because of, you know, system instability, but you can do JBridge if you absolutely need to. Okay, just reading through comments, there's a lot of people mentioning that they have lots of crashes when using JBridge for 32-bit plugins, and that's the problem with 32-bit plugins. So, so I'm seeing you know, a please about clip overlap option. You know, so it could be if you are not seeing the clips overlap that you have a preference enabled. So let's go to your preferences in Cubase, and if you go to audio or editing, sorry about that, and try to make sure that delete overlaps, try toggling that, and then, you know, that will probably fix the problem for you. So you probably have delete overlaps enabled, so try that. Okay, so we have a question, does a sampler track support individual samples per note or round robin or stacking? No, it's really intended just to be like a single sample that you play and manipulate. So if you have your sampler track there, you can, you know, and you have an audio file in, and if you wanted to do more round robin and overlapping, you could actually just see the little arrows here. At this point, you could say, you know, take this sample and automatically map it to Groove Agent, and that will take the Groove Agent data and carry it over and take the sample where you could have more, you know, round robin and different overlapping and 32 velocity layers per key. So the intention of sampler track is just to have very fast, easy access to manipulate samples and play it in a creative way. So any way to get rid of aliasing on some distortion plugins, it's really, you know, some plugins have aliasing and artifacts as part of the plugin, so it's not much you could, you know, it's really kind of the algorithm that the plugin is using. So you may want to check with the plugin manufacturer on that. So question, can I recommend any online courses for Cubase? You know, I'd really just check out kind of the Cubase YouTube channel. There's fantastic resources there. So it's like where a lot of people learn, you know, a lot of pros learn all the tips and tricks and kind of more practical functionality. When will effects side chaining, like in Retrolog, be available in third-party plugins? It is available. It's part of the VST 3.5 spec, so it's really up to third-party plugins to implement it. Okay, so getting back to ghost notes, like from another MIDI track. So yeah, you could definitely do that in Cubase. All you have to do is select them. So let me open up a project. With some so here, if I wanted to take, you know, my flute part, a pad, and my piano, and let's look at those in my editor. And I could have these, so you could view these, you know, so if you wanted to edit the pads or if you want to edit the piano, you could do this and they could automatically be colorized. So if you wanted to do, you know, let's say you want to do, you know, these two parts here, you know, and I could look at these parts together in my editor. And then you could just kind of pick right here between different parts. So you could edit multiple parts, or if you wanted to edit them all together, you could just choose to come right over here. But whatever is selected, you could just, you know, see all the different MIDI notes of selected parts here as soon as you go into the editor. So, and then you can edit, you know, particular parts and switch between what is the active part. So just select the parts that you want to see and go into the editor, and you can see your what other companies call ghost notes. Thanks for the explanation on the term. So question, I have two UR824s. Can I connect two of them together to run in Cubase? So what you could do is take the second UR824, if you want to take the 8 analog outputs of that and connect it directly into the ADAT input. So basically the second one will be using almost like an analog to digital converter. So you take the analog out, the analog inputs, and within the UR824 mix console, connect it to the you know, into the digital and route the analog into digital outs, and then you have 16 of the mic pre's. So it's pretty easy once you have it all set up. Okay, so the question is, I have an old Phantom keyboard. How can I use to control it in the for the mix console? So what you need to do again is if you come over here to the studio setup, click on the plus sign, enable a generic remote, And then once a generic remote has been configured, you want to make sure that you have the right MIDI input and output. And you could say this is this controller, and you could just do a learned function. I wanted to control VST mixer volume 1, and you could just map the controller inputs, the incoming MIDI information at the top to the function you want at the bottom. And then you could use your sliders to control transport, faders, panning, all sorts of good stuff. So I have a question: does Cubase offer dobro or resonator sounds? I don't know of any good ones. You may, I know that the guys that did Virtual Guitarist, UJam, they're kind of back, and they've done like an acoustic guitar set, but I'm not sure if it includes like resonator or dobros in it. But you may want to check out to see what libraries they have available. They might have something that would work, but it's not unfortunately, it's not a common sample library title. So question is, can you transfer preferences from older files to Cubase 10? And he says the colors didn't transfer. So a lot of times the preferences can be stored, and depending which version that you're working with, a lot of the functions can be carried over with the profile manager. The one thing the profile manager in this will store like your presets, preferences, but the one thing it doesn't do is actual colors. If you want to, but the colors are saved with the song. So if you import a song from your old session, um, if you open that up, I think the colors will translate, and then you could save that color scheme as your default color scheme. They can be manually copied over by going into your application data folder, or into like your application support folder on Mac, I believe, where your preferences are. But I think if you actually import a song or open a song, that the colors are carried over with that. So give that a try out of curiosity, or you could just manually copy over the application support folder or application data folder. Okay, so I had a question on, can I explain direct routing summing mode on or off? Okay, so I'll just do a new project here really fast. Thanks for all the great questions, guys and gals. Hope everyone's learning some tips. All right. Let's just open up a Groove Agent. Okay, and this is often kind of used for like parallel processing. Okay, so I'm going to create two different buses here, or two different groups. Okay, so what I want to do is we're going to go to our full mix console. And we're going to make sure that we have our direct routing on. Okay, so I'm going to play the drum part here. So I'll just go to this particular pattern pad and see why we're not hearing it. All right, so for some reason it's not playing. But what we could do with this is with the in the mix console, so we're going to have our groove agent, and I could send the audio outputs of the groove agent to group 1 and to group 2. And what this can do is, and as we kind of can turn this on, and we need to just turn on the direct. So once you have the direct routing summing mode on, you could send the destination to multiple groups. So you could send it to this group, and often what happens is one group may be very heavily compressed. So if we come here to dynamics, or we'll just come directly here and say we just want to really squash this one, and we want to have a parallel source so that this one drum sound, when direct routing summing mode is on, this sound can go into this bus and simultaneously go to this bus and be processed differently. And then you could kind of find the sweet spot between those two settings. And that's often called like New York compression, even though it really wasn't developed in New York. It's kind of done by the mastering engineers in Motown. But you could also come over here or parallel processing. So that's what the direct routing summing mode allows you to do. If that is turned off, it could only go to one source here. Once that's enabled, we could send that one bus to multiple destinations. Okay, so I'm seeing your question about the naming dialogue for the MP3s. It does kind of retain the name, that was last used, and it doesn't automatically populate the field. I'm not sure. There's different schools of thought on that. I could see where, populating the field could be problematic automatically if you wanted to give different information. Just as a rule of thumb, it's always a good idea to, I think, to, populate the naming field. But I can see where maybe you could have it blank, but that could cause problems too. But I understand that issue. Okay, so I think we answered this earlier, but how to have Cubase zoom in and zoom out with, I'll jump to another project here. And how to have it zoom in and zoom out wherever the mouse cursor is. So if you just come here and hit G and H, that'll keep the cursor in the center position. So it's right in the middle of the keyboard, and that's why those particular keyboard shortcuts were used for that. So G and H, and that will keep the playhead in the center. And you could also, if you wanted to use the mouse scroll wheel, just hold down, if you hold down Command or Control, you could zoom in without affecting the playhead as well. So, and if you could kind of just select where you're zooming just like that. So, okay, so we had a question about like the Ghost MIDI notes to be able to see, multiple MIDI parts. So again, we showed how you could just select them and enter the MIDI editor. Okay, so we have a question: how can we record the output of one track into another track? So if I come here, we could kind of do this. I could select a particular track. So let's say I have this vocal selected here. I could come directly here and we could say I want to add a group channel to the selected channel. And we'll go ahead and we'll just call this vocal bus. You could call it whatever. Okay. And now what I want to do is directly to there, I could just say, let's add an audio track. So what we could do is take this channel here and we could send it to ascend to our vocal bus. Enable that. And then I'll go to my audio track here and its input, we could choose vocal bus. So this way we could take the output of this track, route it to a group, and then have that group as the input for another channel. And if you have real-time effects or something like that, you could just do a real-time pass. Okay, so a question on audio alignment. So with the audio alignment functionality, let's say if we have something that is a bit problematic, kind of maybe like these files. Let me just turn that down a little bit. Sorry. So what the alignment function can do, if you're not familiar with it, is you could open it up here and we could select like a reference track, if you will. And then I want to select all of these tracks at once. And then I'm going to just say align audio. And that will do all sorts of kind of auto magic to the particular file here. Now we listen to it. Now, sometimes doing alignment, if you have long files, it may make sense to just split it up. So if you come here and say, okay, I just want to take that and I wanted to, go to your range, editing, and process it. So say you just wanted to, crop at that time, or let's say split would probably be better function. So say we just split and then do alignment in little bits of sections, especially if you have stuff that's, you said a long file that's going. Try just breaking it down into smaller sections. And you could also, sometimes play around with the algorithms, whether it's matching words or scaling. I often use both and find it works really well for that. Okay, so he says, a newbie question. I just bought Cubase 10 Pro and I have no sound. So probably what you want to do is go to your studio setup, to your VST audio system, and make sure that you have your audio interface selected there. And then that would probably do the trick. And that tells Cubase where to route that sound to. And then you have your audio connections menu, and this, you could set your inputs here for your audio interface and your outputs directly there as well. So once you have those things set up, then Cubase knows where to send the audio signal to, where to capture it from, and where to play it back from. So we have a question: why does Cubase 10 not auto delete unsaved projects anymore? I don't think any of the functionality has changed. You may want to check. You may have the auto backups turned on. So if you go to your preferences, or the auto save, so when you come over here to your preferences, I think it's under general. Make sure that your auto save, could be turned on, and that could be causing that behavior. But I don't think anything's changed with that. But sometimes the preferences could get reset in newer versions. Question: why isn't the CC 121 in the remote devices drop down? Because I think once you have it installed, it has an extension. So it doesn't need to be kind of incorporated there. So because it has kind of direct drivers that communicate with it at a much more integrated level. So once you have the CC 121, it just automatically shows up in your studio setup here, and then once that extension is connected, then you're all set from there. So you don't have to add it in, because once you install the extensions and the software for it, it kind of does that for you automatically. So asking this question: do you guys have a converter or method that I can import my Cubase 5 songs into Cubase 10? So I'm not sure if it's Cubase 5 VST, which was like a .all or .arr file formats. So anything from Cubase SX and Nuendo 1 up can be imported, and that's like the last 20 years. All that could be easily imported directly into Cubase 10. If you have Cubase VST5 with the .all, .arr, you can download the last version that imported those files was SXSL3 or SE3. And you could download that and run that on your Cubase 10 license and import and save it as a CPR file. So, and there's a kind of a whole online documentation how to do that as well on the Steinberg site. But if it's Cubase 5 from like, 10 years ago, that would just open right up. But if it's a .aol, .arr, you need to open it in SX3 or earlier, save it as a CPR file, and that should do the trick. So saying more comments on the MP3. So I'll pass that on to the about auto populating the name. So I'll pass that on to developers. And just singing our question, why doesn't Pad Shop or Groove Agent have effects side chaining? I can see where, because Pad Shop is really more, like you could have the same type of filters inside of, um, you know, inside, very similar filters are inside Retrolog, and Pad Shop's really designed as a granular synth where it breaks down all the samples. So, and, Groove Agent's more for playing back samples. So, so you don't really get any unique benefits. The filters are very similar. So, but I could see where, it might be interesting in Pad Shop. I'll inquire about that. Okay, so I think we had questions about the clips, and someone was saying that they just automatically crossfade, which they don't. But if you have kind of multiple clips, make sure check your delete overlaps setting. And you could also just when you go to audio here, there's the there is delete overlap setting. I'm not sure if it's in. But and again, it's in the preferences. So a question: can we assign the key of a song in the project? So yeah, all you have to do is when you go to track and you come directly here, you add a chord track. And then you click on this icon here, and then you could have that key assigned globally for the project. Okay, so a question: can you explain the difference between sends and inserts? Insert will be an effect that's only going to be on that particular track. A send, and is often used for reverbs. You could send all of these vocals to a reverb send, and it's one effect that you have varying amounts of reverb on that track. But I could have one plugin and send multiple tracks to that one plugin in varying amounts, and that's what the send is. So the send is sending to the effects channel track in varying amounts. So multiple channels can access that particular reverb in varying amounts. Okay, so the question is, I have a sample and it slows down at the end. All you have to do is go to the tempo detection of a particular file. All right, and probably not the best loop to do. Let's just find, I think I have a guitar part here. Oh, wrong thing again. Sorry, just keep clicking on the wrong thing. So do a tempo detection, go to audio, to advanced, and choose set definition from tempo. And then it'll follow whatever tempo change you have in the tempo track. All right, so we have a question in the mix console. The meter goes from bottom to, like, the wave meter goes from bottom to top. Doesn't it make more sense to go from top to bottom? I don't think it makes more sense one way or the other, but I think, I think it makes sense. I see going from top to bottom where, but uh, you know, I don't think you miss anything if it's going the other way. But meters go from, a low meter point goes from the bottom, and as there's information, it goes to the top as the signal goes that way, and that's how the waveform is going as well. Is there a way possible to import files from Atari 1040 Cubase? Those save as .all and .arr files. So a couple years ago, I did a number of transfers for the late guitarist Alan Holdsworth, who's, he still had his Cubase Atari set up as well. And just like we mentioned, going into Cubase SX3, save it on a PC formatted floppy disk in your Atari. Take that to a PC, and then you could open those files and save them as CPR files. We've had a number of composers do that recently for old projects. So yes, it can still be done. Okay, with that, let's see. I think we're gone over 3 hours. I want to thank everyone. I'm going to have to go get my son from camp. I want to thank everyone for participating in the Hangout. I hope that everyone has learned a couple of tips and tricks. If you like the Hangout, again, please subscribe to the channel. If not, then we'll go ahead and we'll get wrapping up. We'll see if there's any last minute burning questions. If not, we'll wrap up this Hangout. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions, and hope everyone's learned a couple tips and tricks. And we'll see you next time. I'll just take a quick look at comments. All right, so just wait a minute here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and end the Hangout. Thanks for everyone's patience, and we'll see you. We'll try to get 2 Hangouts in August, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you so much. Goodbye.